It's really a great pleasure and privilege for our campus to host the UC Clark Kerr Symposium. As we begin, let me just step back for a moment and reflect on the significance that Clark Kerr played in the modern history of higher education, and particularly the University of California, both as the Chancellor of UC Berkeley and then as the President of the university from 1958 to 1967. Clark Kerr accomplished much as a leader in that particularly tumultuous time for the state and the nation in the 1960s. His views of successes and trials and tribulations are now available for all of us to digest in his two recently published memoirs entitled The Gold and the Blue. One of the famous quotes, and I don't know whether this is urban legend or truly true, but his most famous quote that most of us who were tutored and learned from his example was the statement that he made upon his departure from the UC presidency, which was, "I leave as I came, fired with enthusiasm." Many of us hope not to repeat that experience. We also know about his vision and leadership at the helm of the Carnegie Commission on Higher Education throughout the 1970s. And clearly his enthusiasm, however he might have been fired with enthusiasm, did not wane as he addressed some of the important problems facing particularly public research university. His legacy surrounds us here today also because Santa Cruz, UC Santa Cruz, was created during his tenure as a campus where large would seem small and personal as much as possible. This morning I want to frame my remarks around Clark Kerr's leadership qualities. For it's those leadership qualities that still guide many of us in higher education today and are useful as we move into this 21st century. Neil Schmelzer noted in his foreword to Clark's book that Clark was an effective leader in higher education because of his ability to grasp the big picture, comprehend the systemness of higher education in California, translate the big picture into a vision, a university that would simultaneously lead the world in quality and serve the people of California as a mass institution with full opportunities for qualified students, and because he grounded his understanding and vision in the realities of social, political, and economic life. If we think about each of these qualities, they're important, and they're as important and applicable today as they were nearly now 50 years ago. So I want to focus on two of these qualities: seeing the big picture and grounding the vision in the realities of social, economic, and political life. You know, public institutions of higher education are educating more students than ever before. The UC system alone will serve nearly 197,000 students in this academic year. And across the nation, just to put this in perspective, because so often when we're talking about higher education, we're talking about some of the most prominent and certainly very excellent private institutions, but nearly 2/3 of all the bachelor's degrees that are awarded in this country every year are awarded by public institutions, and 3/4 of the doctoral degrees are awarded by public institutions. So that fact alone means that the challenges, the issues, and the importance of public research universities going into the 21st century should continue to be of great importance to the nation and certainly to all of us. The large number of students that we are all experiencing and the cultural and racial and ethnic diversity that they represent really make public institutions the crucible for social progress in this next generation. They're coming to our campuses with different and in many respects a wider set of experience than a generation ago. Students' access to new media in particular, as we will talk about later today, changes their idea of what knowledge is and how to access knowledge and how to integrate knowledge. It's one marked difference between now and a generation ago. And it's a difference that changes both our expectations of students and their expectations of us. The nature of the student experience on campus has also changed dramatically. On many public research universities, more students commute or live off campus than are in residence by a substantial number. On our campus, the residential college system has been the core of what we've tried to build here, offering a rare opportunity for students to identify with a living and learning environment, at least for the first couple of years of their education on campus. So there are ways that you can make a large institution seem small and personal, but they take a lot of special effort and a lot of special concern. But that was one of Clark Kerr's goals. He wanted to try a counterpoint to the megaversity. He understood that we needed to try some experiments to try to create new environments for students almost now 40 years ago. But we must acknowledge that success in bringing the picture into focus requires the talent these days, both of committed faculty and professional student affairs staff. This is something that has changed a lot in universities, where the needs, the experiences, the diversity of our students, particularly in their entering years, require a different type of talent and interaction, a new type of professional that sometimes is missed as we talk about the importance of student life as well as the educational experience. It's a metaphor in thinking about the student experience as if we were trying to teach baseball. And the metaphor is this. Too often, we structure our higher education experience as if we're trying to teach baseball by sending prospective players off to batting practice. Then we sent them off to pitching practice, then off to fielding drills. And they get really good at this. They can hit the ball, they can field well, they know how to pitch. And then we throw them out on the field and expect them to play baseball. They, of course, don't understand the game. They don't know on the baseball field what all these drills mean to pull together the whole game. One can't ever become a great or even a good baseball player if one doesn't know the rules and the strategy of the game. It takes a seasoned and expert coach to try to identify this. So that's the problem that we often face in our institutions today, that students are very well understand small segments of what an educated person needs to know, but we sometimes don't provide the glue, the professional coaching, if you will, that allows students to integrate across the fields and to develop their own sense of security and identity for the future. So when we think about students today, we have to remind ourselves that in order for them to succeed in our increasingly complex world, they've got to be prepared to think about systems and connectedness as they pass through our campuses. And one of my favorite quotes from E.O. Wilson is up on the screen. It's from his book Consilience, and it's a vivid reminder of our goal. And he says, every college student should be able to answer the following question: what is the relationship between science and the humanities, and how important is it for human welfare? Most of the issues that vex humanity daily, economic conflict, arms escalation, overpopulation, abortion, environment, poverty, cannot be solved without integrating knowledge from the natural sciences with that of the social sciences and humanities. Only fluency across the boundaries will provide a clear view of the world as it really is. So one of our great challenges today is to continue to do this, given our severe fiscal crises that are facing not only California, but every other state university. Public research universities have to remember, perhaps much more so than some of our private colleagues, that they have to simultaneously lead the world in quality and then serve the people in quantity as well. But back to today's symposium. We will explore the following themes: examining the benefits of a diverse student body, creating innovative curricula, developing an informed and engaged citizen, and preparing students to make meaningful contributions to society. All institutions of higher education are confronting these issues, and there are many lenses through which to examine these issues. The lens we're choosing to look at them through today is the student experience in the public research university. So thank you very much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you on our campus. And I will now turn the podium over to my colleague, Dean Marty Chemers, the Dean of Social Sciences.
I must say that for a Chicagoan who's been a Cub fan for 54 years, it's certainly reassuring when the Chancellor uses a baseball metaphor to kick off this. I'm going to take that as an omen. It's not an accident that we chose to discuss diversity in higher education as our first panel. We want the symposium to take off with a lively and participative mien, and we know that this is a subject of great interest, not only to many faculty and students here at UCSC, but to educators all across America. And so, like the Chancellor, I encourage you to take part in this. And to continue the baseball metaphor, one only has to think back to the day that Branch Rickey and the Brooklyn Dodgers made the choice to integrate baseball by hiring Jackie Robinson, and what a profound effect that had not only on the sport and the business of baseball, but on the society as a whole, to recognize that diversity and the challenges and opportunities that are provided by a multicultural society are something of tremendous importance to all of us in higher education.
What I want to talk about is what kind of institution is capable of examining the benefits of a diverse student body, of creating innovative curricula, of developing informed and engaged citizens, and of preparing students to make meaningful contributions to society. And although I will explain what I mean, in case you would like to stop listening now, the answer is the engaged university, which is an institution committed to service to society through how it approaches its research mission, which includes how it generates and utilizes the knowledge that its faculty, staff, students, and community participants are focusing upon, how it designs both its undergraduate and graduate education and the philosophy and the ideas that guide that design, and how it interacts with the broader community of which it is a very integral part. Now, the path of engagement is a very challenging one. At the time that the Kellogg Commission on the Future of State and Land-Grant Universities was seeking to rethink the roots of the land-grant mission and of the state university mission in a new era, we defined engagement at that time as a sort of ramp toward thinking differently, as the redesign of teaching, research, extension, and service functions to become more sympathetically and productively involved with community concerns and needs. Although the concept of engagement has continued to evolve a great deal since that pronouncement in about 1996 or so, there are some common elements that are starting to emerge, and I certainly discern their outlines at our host institution today, UC Santa Cruz. A fully realized, engaged university has some interesting features that are essential to creating the conditions for exploration of the four themes today. The first is a common agenda developed across fields. Such an institution also has an ability to share power and resources equitably with the community. This is very difficult. It also has to be capable of extraordinary community-based service, learning, problem-based opportunities for students in ways that also shape the agenda and the activities of faculty and administrators, shaped by the interests of the students themselves. We learn better when our knowledge has consequences, not only for ourselves, but for other things we care about, and that is a core concept within our conversation today. And finally, that an engaged institution includes community concerns as a legitimate set of expectations for what the consequences of the knowledge it does produce will have. In sum, engagement is reciprocal. It requires the creation of a shared agenda. It must be mutually beneficial for all who participate and should generate something of real value for all who are part of this effort. It also means fundamentally, and in ways that are often deeply unsettling to universities, that we must think differently about what scholarship is. And we must think differently about what our core mission is. We do not transmit knowledge in this model. We collectively and in interesting and multidimensional ways create knowledge together. That means that scholarship is discovery, integration, interpretation, and application, to use a variation of Robert Boyer's ideas from the early 90s. And it means that the undergraduate curriculum should be research-based, by which I do not mean that we should have the research on how people learn and divide our curriculum accordingly, although that is also true. What it means is, at a university with a strong intellectual environment, the undergraduate experience should be, in fact, equally intellectually stimulating. The characteristics of a 21st century university will not sound all that different from the 20th century at one level, but the means by which it's achieved and interpreted and the effect it has on our students will be very different. The primary purposes of the 21st century engaged university are to conduct research on important problems, ideas, and questions, promote the application of current knowledge to societal problems, and prepare its students to address these questions through a curriculum that engages them in this real work. So the effect on scholarly work should not just be in the lives of our advanced students and in the lives of our faculty and our administration, but it should be in the lives of freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. and opening up new ways to model systems that are complicated and changing. Less and less do we have to stop the action, open systems up, and study a piece of it. More and more we can look at complex, ever-changing interactions of many, many more factors. Not only the development of advanced computing, but also the changes associated with cognitive science, nanotechnology, and to varying extents, biological systems like the genome and proteomics are changing even what we think about and how we think. So this is the kind of world in which the kinds of questions we're exploring today become meaningful in a new way. Because it isn't about our students. The students are, in fact, like canaries in a mine, illustrations of how clear, how complex, how interwoven, how significant our own intellectual, emotional, and social lives are, and the extent to which we can draw them into a world of such richness. Thank you.
It's very great for me to have the opportunity to come here to Dean McHenry's creation and to speak at a Clark Kerr symposium. The blurb that goes with the title, Examining the Benefits of a Diverse Student Body, says, the population of qualified students in public research universities has become more ethnically, culturally, and religiously diverse and inclusive. That is true, but the job is not finished. And I want to talk about why we need to do that, why we have needed to do it over the past 50 years, how it has been done, what the impact has been, and what needs to be done in the future. There are two kinds of reasons. The first of these is that despite what has happened in the last 75 years in this country with regard to providing equality of opportunity in many ways, not all groups in our society have an equal opportunity to compete and advance. They did not in 1975, they do not today. Around this great country, there are still huge segments of the population who remain outside the mainstream and exist in a permanent underclass condition. A vital role of the university is to reach these communities and to help develop young men and women and to prepare them to take leadership roles in their community and in our general multicultural society. And this can only be accomplished by providing the highest quality education possible to people who will one day be in positions of leadership. Now, that's an extremely important reason for pushing for diversity in the great American universities. But there is one that is at least as important, and it's the one that is not so often understood. And that is that if we succeed in these efforts, as we have succeeded to a very large extent, our society as a whole will be enormously enriched, just as the universities in which those students are educated will be enormously enriched by extending access to high quality, affordable education to these people. People talk often as if what we did in affirmative action was for them. It was not for them, it was for us. Every student who has graduated from a great American university since they became diverse has been better educated than he or she would have been before. Every doctor, every lawyer, every teacher, every executive is a better teacher, doctor, lawyer, or executive than he or she would have been had he or she not gotten that education in the context of a multicultural, diverse student body. And that's something we have to remember. And I think it is something that we have to remember and to keep working very much to keep in the forefront of the people who are in the policy-making positions in universities and in the organizations and the institutions that support them. The great growth, I think, in the quality of higher education that has in the United States occurred in the post-World War II period, and perhaps the greatest growth in the period from 1975 to the year 2000. Those were the very years in which those universities became diverse through the kinds of procedures which enabled them to do so. UCLA and Berkeley and Michigan and Stanford were much greater institutions from the strict academic measurement point of view at the end of that period than they were before. Affirmative action and the development of diversity did not in any way decrease the quality of those institutions, as many would argue. Indeed, it increased them. Let's keep our minds set on this. The Michigan decision has given us mixed signals. The Michigan decision will enable us, I think, to continue to do what we ought to do in some areas, but we have to find ways to continue in California, in Texas, and in Florida, and around this country to do what we must in order to continue to build this great country on the principles for which it was founded. Thank you.
I want to talk just a little bit about the quandaries that the political quandaries that the university found itself in when Chuck and I were very ardent supporters of affirmative action, race preferences and ethnic preferences, if you will, in a reasonable setting. They were really heavily contested, although quietly, in the 1980 to 1985 to 1990 times. I would estimate that perhaps a third of my faculty at Berkeley were not very charmed with the idea of using criteria other than strictly academic kinds of criteria. I think it was quiet because there were so many adamant voices, especially student voices, that were very pro affirmative action. I think about a third were quiet because towards the end of my term, more faculty who were opposed to affirmative action came out of the woods. And that led to a much deeper consideration of those issues by the Senate at Berkeley. It turned out fine, and that was good. And it turned out fine because we'd been doing it for a good period of time. And the results, as Chuck says at UCLA, the results were really quite good. Chuck talked about three primary motivations supportive of affirmative action. And I agree with all of them, but I think that the one I use the most and strikes me as a terribly, the soundest reason is really a utilitarian argument, which is in a state that at that time was fast becoming so multiracial that every group was a minority. The health of the society really requires availability of well-educated people of all backgrounds to serve in leadership positions. And this justification stresses taking measures to avoid an apartheid-like future with the best jobs and political posts occupied principally by a Caucasian minority. My major justification has been the future of California for all its citizens, and not primarily the impacts on the university or on the experience of its members. But I want to address that subject because that's the subject of this panel. The chief benefit, beside the one that I've just mentioned, but for the students, really comes from interactions, in my view, among students of quite different backgrounds, at least during my years as chancellor. After all, most of our white students have come from what are de facto segregated suburban areas where only a few who live there and certainly attend school there are from groups other than themselves. African Americans, and these are cartoons, but there's, I think, some truth in these cartoons. African Americans have come from two primary backgrounds. One's are inner city ghettos, which are highly segregated, and the other are middle-class suburbs. But a lot of the African American kids who come at least to Berkeley from from white suburbs all of a sudden have real identity problems when they come together with kids who come out of ghettos, and that's a challenge with regard to running the university. There are some similar kinds of problems with regard to Hispanic youngsters. Of course, Berkeley, as so much of the university, but Berkeley, I guess specifically, has a very large group of students who are of Asian extraction. And second and third generation Asians come from places that where they're distributed geographically and have come from backgrounds that are very similar to the Caucasian students. But they're outnumbered on, or have been outnumbered on the Berkeley campus by immigrant Asians, and those are really very different kids. And again, there are some of the same kinds of identity problems, but not as serious, at least in my view, as there have been for African Americans. So this creates mixing problems of real significance, especially in a large university like ours at Berkeley, that in many ways has an impersonal aura, and in many ways generates a desire on the part of students to find smaller groups with which to identify. Well, there are still problems. Nevertheless, I'm happy that they are, in my view, lessening in relationship to what they've been before. Because if you look at the big purpose, from my perspective, of preparing people to share leadership positions in the society, the university is maybe the first real experience for many of these future leaders to get to know one another. So it's really important from my perspective that they do get to know one another and have those kinds of opportunities.
Changing workforce needs and the needs of society are placing new expectations on both undergraduate and graduate students as they emerge from higher education. And how will the public research universities adapt to these changes? That's what we're really here to find out. In his book, The Creation of the Future, The Role of American Universities, Frank Rhodes described the curriculum in most U.S. public universities as a cafeteria, with little indication of which are the entrees and which are the desserts. And Dante's definition of hell, where nothing connects to nothing. Bill Massey also talks about curricula in U.S. university, and he concludes that our curricula, where knowledge is so highly compartmentalized in non-connecting paths, is a casualty of what the Pew Higher Education Roundtable describes as the academic ratchet, where there has been an irreversible shift of faculty allegiance away from the goals of a given institution toward those of an academic specialty. This is seen at the department curricular levels, where there is a remarkable decrease in foundation courses and progressive curricular offerings to horizontal curricula that present a plethora of unconnected specialty boutique-type courses. Both Rhodes and Massey have called for faculty members in all disciplines in our universities to, quote, recapture the curriculum, unquote. Collectively, the faculty must face difficult and often divisive questions about goals, priorities, requirements, and design ways of achieving them. As has been said by others, the trouble with having no goals is that we may achieve them. I asked this panel of renowned thinkers and doers to help us think about how we, as public research universities, can go about creating and delivering curricula that meets both the needs of our graduate and undergraduate students, as well as society, and how, particularly in these times of ever-dwindling support for public higher education, we can do so in an affordable and sustainable way.
My talk for today is entitled Graduate Curriculum in a Changing World, a Positively Deviant Response. Now, before I explain that title, let me begin by saying that what I mean when I talk about graduate curriculum for purposes of our talk here today is really synonymous with graduate program. I mean to include all those formal and informal practices that constitute the intentionally planned component of a graduate degree. And in that context, there are really four forces that are driving change in what will happen in graduate curriculum so defined. Expansion of interdisciplinary research, expansion of our knowledge base about what the correlates of success are and what, in fact, we can do to increase the likelihood that students who begin graduate programs will complete them. Third, an increased focus on outcomes and concern with looking at the relationship between the preparation students are provided and the jobs they get. And fourth, of course, extraordinary developments in information technology. Now, none of these four forces is brand new. There's been significant conversation about each one of these items really for decades. But what is new is a spirit of reform in graduate education that is really transforming a rather old conversation into rather current action. And now I come to positive deviance. Positive deviance is an approach to problem solving or to innovation in which we begin by identifying problems that exist in a community and the related community norms that seem to reinforce, that solidify, that encourage the maintenance of those problems. Then try to articulate a desired behavioral outcome. How do we want life to change? How do we actually want it to be different? Then, interestingly, identify those individuals in the community who exhibit the desired behavior, which in that community at that point in time is positively deviant. And then, of course, try to design interventions that have the effect of linking those individuals to the community in ways that will allow the community to change. Some futurists foresee radical transformations in the core functions of teaching and learning. They argue that our current orientation toward teaching, where we individualize faculty practice, that is, we allow individual faculty members great latitude in course development and delivery, but we standardize student experience, that is, we put all students through the same course, whatever their special interests, needs, abilities may be, is already rendered obsolete by technology. Instead, they argue we need to individualize student learning and standardize faculty practice. Well, from the point of view of a faculty member, that sends shivers down my spine, as you might guess. However, I think that there are things that can be standardized, that we do need to think in an active way about this. And the one thing that I'm sure about is that current technology has the capacity to do much more for us at the graduate level than it's currently doing. The other most important message that I take from discussions currently about technology and its impact on graduate education is that Michael Schrag, a colleague of yours from MIT, has argued with a group of graduate deans that what's most important about digital technology in reshaping academia is not the way in which it's reshaping information and the management and utilization of information. What's most important about information technology is that it's reshaping relationships and the management of relationships. And at the graduate level, that's a huge insight. I began by outlining four forces driving curricular change: interdisciplinarity, new information about what makes a success in graduate education, career outcomes for students, and technology. Referring back to my earlier comment about positive deviance, again, I urge you to look at UC Santa Cruz for models and inspiration. But don't always round up the usual suspects. Look at those cases, those places in the university where there's aberrant behavior going on. Now, I'm absolutely convinced that if we look for positive deviance, we will, at least in part, find a group of people who will be agents for change and will inspire us to new and better ways of conducting graduate education and life on our campuses. Thank you.
For the last couple of years, I've been chairing a major National Academy of Sciences study trying to understand the impact of information technology on the future of higher education in general and the research university in particular. The first phase of that study reached three important conclusions. The technologists laid out for the decade ahead a certain sense of conviction that the extraordinary evolutionary pace of this technology will not only continue for the foreseeable future, but is likely accelerating on an super exponential slope. The term riding the exponential refers to Moore's law, the fact that different features of the technology increase in power by factors of 100 to 1,000 every decade, and whether it's bandwidth or memory or processing speed, that's all going to continue pretty much into the future as we see it. For planning purposes, from the point of view of universities, compared to what you have today, a decade from now you will have infinite bandwidth and infinite computing power. I only hope it doesn't cost infinite resources. We're evolving from e-commerce and e-government and e-learning to e-everything, since digital devices increasingly become the primary interfaces not only with the environment, but with people, with groups, and with social institutions like universities. This is a disruptive technology in the terms of Clayton Christensen. The impact on the university will likely be profound, rapid, and unpredictable. Universities must try to anticipate these forces and make strategy accordingly. Procrastination and inaction are the most dangerous courses of all during a period of rapid technological change. It's our belief that as universities approach this challenge, they should go back to the basics and strive for a firm understanding of those key values, missions, and roles that simply must be protected and preserved during a time of transformation, beginning with the most fundamental questions. What's the most important mission of your institution? The education of the young, the preservation of culture, basic research and scholarship, serving as a social critic, and so forth and so on. I want to focus on three topics that spin out of this that relate to learning, and I think that relate to the curriculum. The first one of these has to do with the new literacy. Generally, people refer to the fact that we've evolved from the oral tradition to the written word to multimedia. But in reality, there are many forms of literacy: art, poetry, mathematics, even science itself. There's a deeper issue that's involved here, though, because we are evolving from a read-only listening or viewing definition of literacy to that of actually composition, of creating. What that's doing is it's placing a premium in our society on those professions such as art, music, architecture, and I would suggest even engineering, that stress the side of the brain that creates things that have never existed before. That's a bit of a challenge because in universities we're quite skillful in teaching the ability to analyze, but much less in teaching the ability to synthesize, to create. A century ago, John Dewey put forth the premise that most students learn best through the active discovery and application of knowledge. He called it constructionist learning. From John Dewey to Jean Piaget to Seymour Papert, we have ample evidence that this kind of inquiry-based or constructionist learning is the way that at least this generation learns best. That suggests that perhaps as we look at the curriculum, it may be time to integrate the educational mission of universities with their research and outreach activities by ripping instruction out of the classrooms, or at least the lecture hall, and instead embedding it in the discovery environment of the laboratory or the studio, or the experiential environment of professional practice. The second topic, the plug-and-play generation. These students are the first generation that have spent their entire lives immersed in robust visual electronic media, from Sesame Street to MTV to home computers to cyberspace. They approach learning as a plug-and-play experience. They don't mess with a textbook. They experiment and learn that way. They multitask. They've mastered a far broader range of literacy skills than our faculty have. They understand the technology and are used to it. It's our sense that for a time these students may tolerate the linear sequential lecture paradigm of the traditional college curriculum. They're going to read what we assign, write the required term papers, and pass our exam. But this is not the way they learn. In a sense, sooner or later, they will demand change. The third issue, how does learning really occur in these environments? The faculty are concluding that with this generation, the best approach may actually be to turn the students loose, to let informal learning lead and shape formal learning in a way that responds to the great diversity of how these students learn, relying on peer-to-peer learning as rapidly replacing faculty teaching as the dominant educational process on a technology-rich campus. The final comment. In reality, what these students are doing is using the new technology as a communication technology to build learning communities. Now, that shouldn't be surprising because learning is primarily an experience of social interaction. It requires the presence of communities, and the reason for marvelous campuses like UC Santa Cruz is we provide those learning communities in a very effective way. Right now, the students are redefining what the nature of those communities are. In most cases, they will be in physical places like campuses, but in many ways, they will be spread out in cyberspace itself. What we need to do is think about learning, and in the words of John Seeley Brown, as being an ecology that adapts and evolves based on the nature of those who are involved in the learning process. And the key for institutions is to provide a rich infrastructure where these ecologies can grow. However, the message we're getting out of this is increasingly don't let the faculty lead the effort because the students are going to drive the change themselves. In conclusion, because of the unpredictable impact of the technology, therefore, one of the most important recommendations of our study group is that it is a time and an opportunity for bold experimentation. If you don't understand the future, the best way to approach it is to try and create it through models. And of course, this takes us back to the original idea behind UC Santa Cruz. It explored the merger of the liberal arts college with the research university and took its place as one of the bold visionary experiments in American higher education. It's our sense, driven by this technology, that the time has come again for these experiments. And on each of our campuses, I think we really have to strongly encourage this ability to create the future by exploring it, recognizing that much of that exploration will be done by our students themselves.
What we're challenged with, and perhaps the most striking difficulty I think most research universities will have, is that as you no longer are required by virtue of the mechanism or mode of instruction to deliver content in 50-minute chunks 3 times a week, that opens up enormous opportunities and enormous challenges. The biggest tome that guides institutions that I know of is the course catalog. And the course catalog sets the time, the place, and the location for which instruction occurs. Technology has allowed us to change when the instruction occurs, and certainly has made it asynchronous so that time is no longer important and can be displaced in terms of place, which leads you to the perspective of being able to deliver instruction in a mode that makes the most sense for the instructional goals that you have, as opposed to making maximum utilization of facilities between 9 and 5. Doing that, however, is horrendously wrenching for an institution, but it is in fact one of the biggest opportunities. The other thing I'd like to point out is that with respect to the interaction that technology makes possible, the use of technology in teaching makes public the actions that once were private in the classroom. At least it has the potential for doing so. By making it public, you can examine it from multiple perspectives. You can look at the full expression of the course. You can share it with others. You can reflect on it. You can count. You can build upon it. Sounds remarkably like the process of doing science. In closing, I'd like to make a brief reminder, or at least take a moment to remember that technology is in fact in service of scholarship and teaching.
I flew in late last night from Washington, D.C. after a 2-day grueling trip with other CEOs from the software industries. One issue kept coming up, and this is the issue that I think is most appropriate to the agenda that you're talking about at this conference. And this was not an issue that we planned on talking about, yet it was an issue that came up when the CEOs met privately at the beginning of the day on Tuesday, and it was an issue that came up with just about every meeting that we had, whether it was the Speaker of the House or whether it was the Secretary of Treasury or the Department of Labor. The issue was around us as an industry hiring people outside the United States. Outsourcing. Not outsourcing by using other companies, but hiring Adobe employees, Microsoft employees, Autodesk employees in places like India and China and other low-cost labor markets. Big, sensitive issue. So I want to spend some time talking about that, and then talking about what I think you can do and your peers can do to help us all. First of all, every single software company that was represented at that meeting is hiring overseas and hiring aggressively. We, along with the other software companies, are seeing a savings of anywhere from 4 to 1 to 6 to 1. An employee here that would cost us $90,000, we get an equivalent skill set for $15,000. Great financial advantage, especially when all of us CEOs are being told by our shareholders, be more profitable. Don't take risk. The other thing we get is we get a global perspective by having employees that work outside the U.S. Half of our revenues are outside the U.S. We get people who understand what's happening around the world so they could design and develop products that meet a global society, not a U.S.-centric. And quite frankly, I get concerned because sometimes I think we're very California-centric, and sometimes I think we can't even get outside of San Jose in our thinking. The other thing is, those countries where we're hiring employees will ultimately be the fastest growing markets for us. The U.S. is becoming more mature as a marketplace, yet countries like China and India and some of the Latin American countries and some of the other Asian countries are investing heavily in modernizing their countries through IT investments. It's not difficult finding employees there. What's scary is, at one time, you would be training through your great programs many foreign students. I've heard numbers of up to 50% of the computer science graduates come from outside the U.S., students that are trained here. The good news is at one time they stayed here, and we were able to hire them. The bad news is they don't want to stay here anymore because they could go back home, live a relatively good lifestyle, and be close to their families and friends. So they don't have to live here anymore. And that's what's happening. The other thing that's scary is countries like India and China are actually graduating more computer science graduates than we are here in the United States. So that pool of talent is going to become greater and greater. The other thing, and quite frankly, this to me, when I think long term, and I think about the country long term, those countries are investing more in their K-12 institutions and graduating kids with better basic fundamentals in math and science than we are here in the United States. So this is scary. Yet, every one of the CEOs that were represented there believed that real innovation is going to happen here in the United States. We just believe that because of the capital structure and the capital markets of the U.S. economy, the venture community, the universities, and the high-tech companies that are located in places like Silicon Valley, that we have a tough time believing or seeing that true innovation is going to happen outside of the United States. That will only be true if we can find the right talent. And that's where I believe the opportunity of this group comes into play. Because if we're going to pay 6 times the salary, we better have employees, students who graduate, that are much more qualified than what we'll get in places like India and China. So, a couple of questions I have for you to think about. First one being, are you doing enough to migrate and transform to produce the type of future employees we need? In other words, as we have transformed as a tech community, are you transforming your curricula? And second question is, how are you going to adapt your curricula to produce graduates that are both broad and deep, who are innovative but also work well in a group, who are risk takers but also have strong ethics, who are innovative, independent thinkers that are well grounded with a global perspective? And the third question I have for you is, what are you doing, what are we doing to make sure that we have a talent pool to pull from K-12? Are we doing enough to partner with those K-12 institutions to make sure that we're taking kids who are the best and brightest in math and science and have the most aptitude to succeed and will be hired by companies like Adobe and Microsoft. Let me finish by telling you I do have a very personal interest in this subject. First of all, I want to continue to hire people here in the U.S. because I believe that will allow us to continue to grow and prosper as an industry. The other is I am a parent of a daughter who is getting close to college years, and I hope someday that by you providing the right education, or the K-12 schools providing the right education, and you providing the right education, that she'll be able to find a high-tech job in a company like Adobe. You've done a great job, and I commend you for giving us the talent over the last 20 years, and I look forward to you doing the same in the future. Thank you.
Well, the first panel of this afternoon is going to turn to a question which has already been evoked in the remarks of various speakers this morning, and it is a question of the finality of the undergraduate experience, and especially of the finality of the undergraduate experience in the context of citizenship. The modern university, and usually the modern university is dated from the creation of the University of Berlin in 1820, the modern university was defined as a university that actually prepares people for citizenship in a state. And the modern university, the University of Berlin, thought that this could be achieved by what its founder, the one who wrote the constitution of that university, von Humboldt, called the culture university. It is a university that actually taught a particular notion of culture. And the term culture, which we use a great deal today, was actually very much in fashion in the early 19th century because it was felt to provide the cement that societies needed after the disruptions of the French Revolution and the other upheavals of the Napoleonic Wars. Well, remarkably, this model of the Culture University held for quite some time. It eventually gave way, probably about 30 years ago, with a different name for what we are supposed to be, and it's the University of Excellence. When a university is excellent, and when everybody in a university is excellent, you don't have cement. What you have is silos. That's what happens to cement when it hardens. And so what you have is everybody is excellent in his own area. And that area then will be defined in such a way that I will be excellent in my area. And since I cannot be excellent across many areas, then I will define my area as an ever smaller one. And this has produced now for 30 years the kind of university in which the specializations have narrowed and where the program of culture, the problem of citizenship, has been pushed a bit to the side. And not surprisingly, religion has come back in society as a very powerful force. In fact, while we were being excellent and abandoning culture, religion came back and offers explanations and offers regresses that people can appeal to deal with. That creates a problem for all of us, and it happened on our watch. We also have the problem, under those circumstances, that we are calling now for the growth of interdisciplinary programs. But how will we have these interdisciplinary programs? What will they be for? What will they actually work for? We don't really know under those circumstances because we now have enshrined this goal of excellence everywhere. So we need to challenge this idea of excellence in order to examine what the university is all about. And I think that this panel has as its function to make some proposals in this area, and specifically for a public university. It's extremely important to have the public university regain that space of the public sphere and to consider how do we educate our students for that particular sphere.
The title, I guess, overall is Rethinking the Student Experience. Along those lines, I thought it might be well if we try to take a look at the state of our democracy now, because I don't think we can really talk about the issue of how do we engage students in citizenship without looking at the overall atmosphere of politics in this country right now and what's taking place. And for that, I think we do have to go back to the basic themes established by our forefathers. Every one of them, whether it was John Adams or Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Jefferson or others, were concerned about the centralization of power, concerned that they didn't want a king or a king parliament or a star chamber court, and so created this remarkable system of three separate but equal branches of government, each a check and balance on the other. But as we know, that is not only a formula that they believed would work for this democracy, it can also be a formula for gridlock. What they believed would be the magic ingredient to make that system work rested in their belief that people would elect leaders who would then exercise the kind of strong leadership to ultimately find consensus. They believed deeply that people who were elected, yes, would have their different ideologies and their different beliefs. They would come from very different directions on many issues. But ultimately, the purpose of the democracy they were establishing was to find consensus and to move the country forward. That's essentially what happened in Philadelphia. It is essentially what they believed would be the essence of the strength of our democracy. So, to understand, I think, how our system is supposed to work, we need to ask ourselves what were the major ingredients of what they believed would make our democracy work. And one of those clearly was leadership. Leadership willing to take risks. Secondly, the demand for sacrifice, that all of them understood that in order to, in effect, carry this burden of our democracy, that sacrifice was a necessary part of that, and that we shouldn't be afraid to say sacrifice, nor should we be afraid to demand sacrifice on the part of all citizens in facing the challenges that face us all. Because the third principle they believed deeply in was the principle of caring for your neighbor and caring for their communities. If people were not working together to care for each other, our democracy would never have become as strong as it is today. I have often said that the era we are in is the age of paradox, that we are dealing with a number of contradictions, both of which can be true. And we see that in a number of areas. We see that certainly with military power, that on one hand we are the strongest country in the world in terms of our military power, but the paradox is for all of that power, we have not achieved peace in the Middle East. We are still struggling to find stability in Iraq. We are still struggling to try to find the solution to dealing with the challenges that face this world, whether it's disease or poverty or hunger or religious differences that exist across the earth. So it isn't enough to be powerful. We have to also have the wisdom and the understanding and leadership to know how to use that power. Another paradox is our economy. We are very strong in terms of our economy, no matter how difficult the last few years have been. The reality is we're still the strongest in the world. And yet the paradox is, for all that strength, we are running huge deficits at the federal level, almost now approaching $500 billion. We are seeing a situation where we still have 1 out of 4 living in poverty in this country, and over 44 million who are without any kind of health insurance. So, yes, we are strong as an economy, but if we don't have the leadership to understand how to use that power, it can be for naught. But the greatest paradox of all, I think, is our democracy. We are without question a beacon to the world of what a democracy ought to be. Wherever I went with the President of the United States, there wasn't any country that didn't look to this nation as the beacon of what freedom and self-government is all about. And yet the paradox is one that I think is obvious to all of you. For all of that, in the last presidential election, we had less than 50% of the people who were qualified to vote turned out to vote. The real problem that concerns me is how it affects the younger generations. At our Institute of Public Policy, the Panetta Institute, we did research over the last 5 years, looking across campuses, college campuses. What are the attitudes of students with regards to public service, with regards to being involved in our government? Every year, including the period after September 11th, which was a little bit of a surprise, 73%, between 73 and 75%, said they would never choose a career in public life. 80% said they had not even had a conversation with an adult about getting involved in public life. 80%. You know, my parents were immigrants from Italy, but I can assure you that when we sat down to meals, they made very clear that my brother and I had an obligation to give something back to this country because of what it had given them. That message is not being delivered. 94% did not volunteer for any political campaign in the last election. 94%. When I ran for Congress in this area, we depended on students being involved and working in campaigns. For whatever reason, that's not happening. At the same time, close to 80% are interested in volunteering at the local level, being involved in the community, in education, in conservation, in work within the community. Why is there this difference? We asked that question. And the answer we got back was that what's happening in Washington or Sacramento, for that matter, is not relevant to our lives. It's understandable in the sense that they view what's happening in Washington and Sacramento as it's like another channel on television. It isn't real. And they view it very much as something that is disassociated from their own lives. And to a large extent, I think that affects all of us. The increased partisanship in Washington or Sacramento has made governing a process whereby it's all kind of another version of Crossfire, in that people just basically sit and yell at each other as opposed to trying to work with each other. In addition to that, money obviously plays an even larger role in politics. And people feel like they have no relationship to what's going on in politics because it's people who contribute either through special interests or the wealthy, who are largely the ones that are funding elections. And therefore, they don't feel like they're part of that process. Thirdly, there is the fight over power, which is very thin at the margins, and so both parties struggle to find those battles as to who will control what chamber of the Assembly or what chamber of the legislature or the Congress. In addition to that, as a result of redistricting, particularly in this state, but it's true for across the country, parties have redistricted in a way that creates safe Democratic and safe Republican districts. And that makes both parties even more partisan because each candidate, whether you're Democrat or Republican, worries about primary challenges either to the left or to the right. And so the parties have become much more extreme in terms of their ideologies as well. All of that means that both of them refuse to lead in a way that takes risks. And so if we don't lead in a way that takes risks, and leadership is about taking risks, then the alternative is to lead by crisis. I've said in our society we either lead through leadership or we lead through crisis. And we today govern more by crisis than by leadership. So all of those things send a terrible signal to the younger generation that basically says, why should we participate in a process that really does not come together to try to work towards solutions? I don't think this is going to change from the top down. I think this is only going to change from the bottom up. Clearly, it would be better if there were a reaching out. In my generation, John F. Kennedy basically reached out to my generation and said, obviously it was, don't ask what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And I think a generation responded. We changed the face of America in race relations and civil rights, in issues of war and peace and the environment. There were tremendous changes that took place. We didn't solve, obviously, all of the problems, but we clearly had an impact in terms of what the face of America was all about. In a recent lecture series, Tom Brokaw, who had the book, obviously, The Greatest Generation, we had him at the Institute, and a student got up and said, how can we become the greatest generation? And Brokaw said, look, it doesn't take a war, it doesn't take a depression. What it takes is that you're willing to fight for something you believe in. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. So how do we, in fact, engage students then in this process? One is they clearly have to be encouraged to vote. And I think there has to be, both on all of the campuses, a much greater effort to try to involve them in voting. Secondly, I do believe that we do not provide a sufficient civics curriculum for students at the elementary and secondary and high school level. Thirdly, I do believe that service learning, where you somehow encourage that what they are learning is tied to service duty within the community, so that students know they've got to engage in the community and serve at some capacity. And the last point I would make, which I know is controversial, is that ultimately I believe this country has to provide a national service system for all students, in which they serve this country for 2 years in some capacity, either in education or the environment or conservation or juvenile justice or in the military, and in return for that get a GI Bill of Rights that provides for their education and provides some of the same benefits as we do for service to this country. I believe deeply in service, and I'm afraid that what young people are doing is basically, for whatever reason, they do not see the requirement that they have to give something back to this country in that capacity. We have got to provide that incentive.
Today, public universities, and privates as well, are confronted with a different kind of problem created by unequal access both to quality of life and educational opportunity, often called the non-level playing field. In words found in Daniel Coit Gilman's inaugural address as president of the University of California, Gilman said, "A public university must be of the people and for the people. One should not discuss student experience avoiding these questions. Who are the people? Who are the students? Who are the students who sought admission but were denied? Who are the students who have the potential to be admitted but were never given encouragement or opportunity to qualify for admission?" The answers to these questions are critically important to the future of the public research university in the 21st century. Jefferson's understanding of the importance of an educated citizenry to the effective functioning of a democracy is as cogent today as when first expressed. A radical change in student experience took place as a consequence of the Morrill Act of 1862, establishing land-grant institutions, of which UC is one such. So where does that leave us today? Now, my suggestion is born, not surprisingly, on the success of the Morrill Act of 1862 and the often underutilized idealism and sense of community service of college-age youth. Land-grant universities and colleges prepared unprecedented numbers of students for an emerging industrialized society. It was inclusive in purpose as well as real-world application-oriented, as opposed to the older colonial colleges. Through the creation of extension and field stations, it brought the knowledge of the university community to the farmers and the factories, and this tradition remains strong today. The most challenging problems faced by our nation today, however, are of a very different character than they were in the 19th century and most of the 20th century. Typically, they are a composite of technical, economic, and social policy problems tightly coupled and often focused on a particular region. Urban areas provide a good example. In a 1968 Phi Beta Kappa lecture in New York City, Clark Kerr introduced the idea of a new kind of land-grant university, which he called an urban grant university. His idea was to bring the university community to the city much in the same way that agricultural extension programs brought the university to the farmers. University outreach programs in K-12 education, community health, community planning, and economic development are a few possible examples. My experience in the University of California, especially here on this campus, suggests that there would be significant student interest in such programs. I leave unspoken the positive impact that such programs will make on the participants and on their student experience. Repeating my early assertion that student experience is heavily dependent on faculty culture, I suggest that the following are critical determinants of change from the status quo. Faculty culture, not surprising, depends on who are the faculty and what motivates their activity on a campus. Accordingly, it's critically important to continue to place major emphasis on diversifying the faculty, to broaden the life experience base of faculty who teach our students. Almost a duh kind of statement. Although progress has been made in public research universities, we're not close to being representative of the diversity of the population of our state or nation. But this isn't enough. A diverse faculty in today's university culture is handicapped by the narrowly drawn reward structure which defines success. Until the application of knowledge is seen to be as important as the discovery of knowledge. The application of knowledge is seen to be as important as the discovery of knowledge. Until the development of people is seen to be as important as the development of knowledge. People are as important as knowledge in their development. We've heard that over and over again. I think until we understand that in our institutions and support those propositions, there's little hope for change. To conclude, we are surrounded by walls of insurmountable opportunity, Pogo once said, and we've met the enemy, and it is ourselves. Thank you very much.
Our challenge, it seems to me, and it was in fact said in the following way in an early communication that I got, it is to universities to create environments that help develop informed and engaged citizens. That challenge is exactly the same, in my view, for all of the universities, public and private, that try to do what the University of California at Santa Cruz does, the other campuses of the University of California do, and Stanford does as well. The problem, if I can state it bluntly, is that the students we graduate are too often narrowly informed and only partly engaged. What do I mean? In the first place, they've been given what amounts to a fairly light dusting of general education and liberal arts and considerable depth in one narrow specialty. What they haven't been given is a real interdisciplinary focus that's problem-driven rather than discipline-driven. I want to conclude with a short list of 5 items. A lot of curiosity and a sense that they're not done yet. Some intellectual taste. They're, after all, going to have to ferret information out of a rather chaotic morass, and the more complicated the technology makes information accessible to us, the more complicated the morass is, and the more skill that it takes to extract it, and the more taste it takes to tell what to keep and what to throw away. Most important of all, though, I think, are, first of all, the confidence that new tools can work over unfamiliar environment, because most of what we give them is to apply new tools to problems that have already become familiar. And what I see lacking in many students is a sense that, yeah, this is so good, I can make it work on a novel problem. And finally, that sense of incompleteness, the sense of leaving the table hungry, that what one has been taught mostly is not knowledge, but the capacity to learn. Thanks.
I'm glad that Marcy brought up baseball today, in part because one of the things that we need to know and understand about baseball is one of the reasons that minorities do so well, especially the Latino players, is that everyone knows the rules and the playing field is level. Jesse Jackson has laid that out for us many times. Everyone knows the rules and the playing field is level. If we can accomplish that, then not only can minority staff, faculty, students participate in our institutions, but they can excel. And that's one of the lessons that baseball gives us. The second one is what the Florida Marlins did to my favorite San Francisco Giants. They didn't allow Barry Bonds to bat. Right? They didn't allow him to bat. And so the lesson that we take is that we've got to let everybody bat. We've got to let everybody up to the plate. We have to let them. We can't disenfranchise them, so we can't pick and choose. We need to take everybody and the whole team together and let them come to bat. Today the conversation has been great, and there's been a lot of discussions about the demographics of California. Indeed, I haven't been to a meeting at the University of California over the last 25 years where the demographics issue has not been brought up. Sometimes it's called the changing demographics, other times it's called tidal wave 2, sometimes it's called the changing face of California, but we talk about it all the time. What's also clear is that while we were talking and while we were planning, the demographics changed. For the graduating class of 2002 in our public schools, Asian Americans make up about 9% of the student body K-12 and 12% of the high school graduates. African Americans make up about 8% of the student body and 7% of the high school graduates. White students make up about 34% of the enrollment and 43% of the graduates, and Latinos make up 45% of the enrollment and 34% of the graduate. I bring these data before you to indicate this demographic change that has occurred, because I view it, for the University of California at least, as a demographic imperative. For this new millennium, we, together, as educators, have a very special role in keeping with the theme of this last set of presentations. And that is, we have to develop a very clear goal that's leading us towards a multicultural understanding in our state, but more importantly, to a functioning multicultural society. I believe that to assume these roles, these leadership roles, we need to provide these students with knowledge, abilities, and skills that are going to foster cross-cultural working relationships. They need to know about each other, about their pasts, and about their present realities. They need to have the ability to build alliances and also partnerships. They need to have the skills to ameliorate conflict and to drive change in public policy. How are we going to do this? I think that the university has to commit both its curriculum and its co-curriculum to this effort. And we must use all of our talents, all of our programs, and our services to help create a functioning multicultural state. Our goal should be to develop the leaders for that state. This campus attempts to contribute to that promotion of intercultural and cross-cultural understanding and unity in many ways. I want to feature the colleges. The colleges at Santa Cruz, including these last two that will be dedicated tomorrow, promote multicultural understanding by providing a sense of community, membership, inclusion, and an opportunity to learn and work collaboratively with students from different cultural backgrounds. I've tried to make 3 points in my brief remarks. The first is that California universities face a demographic imperative in preparing our students for a multicultural society. Second, that preparation must involve both the curriculum and the co-curriculum. And third, that preparation, it must be purposeful and planned. It must be promoted and supported. It must be organized and structured. And finally, it needs to be evaluated and constantly improved in order to be effective. For this university to be in service to our state, we must accomplish many, many tasks. I believe that if we do not accomplish this one, we cannot call ourselves an effective or successful institution of higher learning. If you ask me, must we do this? Absolutely yes. If you ask me, can we do this? I have to answer, absolutely yes. If you ask me, will we do this? I reluctantly answer, I don't know. Thank you for your time and your attention.
The topic we were given is an easy one to address, how to prepare students to make meaningful contributions to life. You want to prepare the students? Model the behavior and let them play at the game. Right? That's easy. That's how they're going to learn to be leaders. Let them lead and also show them what it's like to lead. And then to see that the college as a structure in the campus is a co-production, it's a team. And it has all the strengths of the team. That is, it brings diverse perspectives and diverse expertise together into a common goal and forces us to work together, not to allow the student affairs perspective to have the full say, nor to reduce everything to the academic say. And in that way, the college structure itself reinforces modeling that kind of leadership behavior in front of the students and creates that context. Now, I mentioned the term safe space because it was a term that I really didn't learn until I had long meetings at night in the provost living room or in the senior common room talking to students about fraught things. The incredible learning that I saw go on at those moments, sometimes they're called teachable moments, but they are learning moments because the agentiveness of the teacher is not there, generally happen when people are stretched to the edges or just beyond their comfort zones. And that's where the learning occurs. And that really only happens when you can create a sense of a safe space to do that. And that doesn't automatically happen, because when people are not confident that they can go to the edge of their comfort zone in communication, they will respond to avoid conflict by silence. The massification of the university tends to lock up the value of that diversity and to increase the siloing because it separates people. So it was not to it was to cash in on all those advantages of the big institution, but find a way to modularize it so that there was always something that was working in the other direction to counterbalance it in an ecological way. I did this survey and I wrote this document up, and I got to the point where I started talking about Santa Cruz, San Diego, and Irvine, and they were completely different from all the other campuses. And at that point, I felt, oh dear, this is Clark Kerr's fingerprints all over this. So I had the section called The Kerr Campuses. And in every one of those three campuses, the initial power was given to something besides an academic department. The schools at Irvine, colleges at Santa Cruz and San Diego, research organizations at San Diego, boards of study here. Anything but a department seemed to be Kerr's answer. And it wasn't an answer, though. It was actually, I believe now, the question he asked. He created 3 campuses like a great experiment for what would those structures do, what kind of institutions would come out of trying to support a countervailing structure to the one that is usually maximized in the institution. In that one career, such effort had been given to thinking carefully about how we actually accomplish all this stuff. I can say, we've heard a lot of grist for our mill. It's time to think about how you design a mill to grind this grist. Because what he really gave the campus in the form of the colleges, I think, was the recurring question. We really need to ask that question again. And that, for us who work here locally and who think about the history of the campus, is a very important point, because I think sometime we have heard a couple of times the colleges described as an experiment. They were their experiment. They're the PIs on that experiment. But our experiment, we should not confuse the lab with the experiment. The colleges are our lab, and we have many things we can try out. And to make them truly the structure within the university that they were intended to be, I think we do have to take all the kinds of things we've heard today and try them very much out in this kind of laboratory. And like good experimentalists, look and see what works, do more of that. If it's not working, don't keep doing the same thing and accepting a different outcome, but go try another experiment. Thank you for your patience.
It started as a Clark Kerr symposium this morning, and so I'll go back to Clark for just a few more moments and talk about something he talked about a lot, which was the transformation of the university. He pointed out that universities in this nation started out essentially as moral organizations, religious organizations. They were founded for the purpose of teaching young people, mostly young men, about the religious and moral principles by which they should lead their lives. That was overtaken by the next stage of transformation, which you heard about from one of our speakers this morning, when the Moral Act, the Land Grant Act began. That because it was really about moral values, and then it became about access to education for a broader segment of society when the Moral Act and the Land Grant Institution came along. And then, after World War II, the real effort to what has now been referred to by several knowledgeable people in the area of higher education as the true massification of higher education. After World War II, it became the case that many, many more people expected to have access to higher education, and we've probably now moved at the turn of the 21st century to a situation where education is no longer thought of as a privilege, it is now considered a right. And that's changed the way students feel about their education. It's changed the challenges that those of us who are in academic institutions have. And I think it is pushing us rapidly into a slightly different set of circumstances. What is the next transformation of the American university? What is it that we're doing today? Well, I would say that we are in this fourth transformation, but I'd like to talk for just a moment as we end up this symposium about the work of the university and who's doing it and who's doing what in universities today, and how important I think it is and how necessary it will be for us to accomplish this goal in order for us to deliver on the things that we've talked about today, preparing the engaged student, preparing citizens for the future. And that is that there's a lot of work in the university. Some of it is done by the faculty, and the intentional curriculum is in fact the responsibility of the faculty, and they should spend a great deal of time thinking about whether it's well integrated, whether it's accomplishing its goals, whether it has expanded, whether it needs to contract. That is an important and the traditional and delegated role of the faculty. The other environments that you heard about being created are very hard for many of our sister universities to accomplish because they don't have a residential environment. It is very difficult to create in today's commuter university an environment where you are truly able to integrate the social experiences of students, the learning experiences that help them overcome their own prejudices, and think through what it is I want to be when I grow up. What is it that I'm going to take from this institution? We need to learn what the special expertises are. We need to understand that the faculty don't have to do it all. To create an environment in which students develop as leaders can be done in the colleges, and it can be done largely by the people who have been trained and who spend their lives and whose career aspirations are to master the mind of the 18 to 22-year-old. So we need to take this opportunity of having a residential population. 50% of our students live on campus. Almost all are freshmen and sophomores. They come to us from all over the state. They come to us from all different backgrounds. But what they need to share is a common understanding of how you put yourself together in this society and move forward. And the faculty don't have to do all that, but they do have to provide an intellectual basis in concert with the student affairs people in order to create the kind of environments in colleges that will allow us to map the intellectual, intentional curriculum and some of the unintentional consequences that we are, in fact, rather good at doing. So that is where I hope, personally, the next transformation of our institution will go. Thank you all for coming.